Estimating an electrical job, consider the cost of materials, labor, and other factors. For this particular job, which includes running two 120 volts 20 amp circuits from an indoor garage panel to feed an electric fence opener and 4 coach lights approximately 80 feet away, we can break down the costs. The job involves trenching, running the wiring under a sidewalk, wiring the fence opener and lights, installing a GFCI receptacle, and installing an empty conduit for control wiring. Let's look at material costs. Firstly, the wire and conduit. We will need approximately 150 feet of THHN wire, which is estimated at $29. Secondly, approximately 100 feet of PVC conduit, estimated at $69. Thirdly, approximately 20 feet of half-inch PVC conduit is estimated at $335. These material costs can fluctuate based on location and supplier. Now, let's factor in labor costs. This job is estimated to take the better part of 2 days, approximately 6 to 8 hours. The breakdown of labor time includes the following. Firstly, 2 to 3 hours for trenching. Secondly, 1 to 2 hours to wire the fence. Thirdly, 1 to 2 hours to install the light and receptacle. And fourthly, 1 hour to install the control PVC. These are estimates, and actual labor time may vary based on experience, site conditions, and unforeseen challenges. Important assumptions. It is assumed that the homeowner will supply the fence opener and light fixtures. If not, the cost would need to be adjusted to include these materials. Considering the material costs of approximately $435 and the labor costs for 6 to 8 hours, it's important to factor in additional expenses such as permits, transportation, and overhead. It is also important to include a profit margin to ensure the business is sustainable. When bidding on jobs, there are several factors to consider. Firstly, the cost of materials. Secondly, the labor time required. Thirdly, overhead expenses. Fourthly, a reasonable profit margin. If a homeowner decides to go with a lower bid from another contractor, it's ultimately their decision. It's important to stand by the bid and not undervalue services. There is always the opportunity to bid on future jobs with a higher price, especially if the quality of work and service are valued. In summary, estimating an electrical job requires careful consideration of material costs, labor time, and other expenses. It is important to provide a fair and accurate bid that reflects the value of the services provided. When homeowners choose to go with a lower bid, it's important to respect their decision and move on to other opportunities. Regarding wire sizing and conduit fill for the two 120 volts 20 amp circuits, one must adhere to the National Electrical Code, or NEC, requirements. For 20 amp circuits, typically number 12 American wire gauge, or AUG, copper conductors are used. The specific type of wire, such as THHN, is suitable for use in conduit. To determine the correct conduit size, one needs to consider the number of conductors being run. The NEC provides tables for conduit fill, such as those found in Chapter 9. These tables specify the maximum number of conductors allowed in a particular size of conduit. For example, if running 4 number 12 AWG THHN conductors, 2 for each circuit including the neutral, half-inch PVC conduit will likely be sufficient, but it's essential to consult the NEC tables to confirm compliance. When trenching, the NEC specifies minimum burial depths for electrical conductors. For residential branch circuits, such as the ones being installed for the fence opener and coach lights, the minimum burial depth for direct burial cables is typically 12 inches. However, if the conductors are installed in rigid metal conduit or intermediate metal conduit, or RMC or IMC, the minimum burial depth can be reduced to 6 inches. Since PVC conduit is being used, the minimum burial depth would likely be 18 inches, but it is critical to verify this with local codes and the latest edition of the NEC. When running the conduit under the 3-foot wide sidewalk, it must be ensured that the conduit is buried deep enough to prevent damage from pedestrian traffic or other potential hazards. It is also important to properly compact the soil after trenching to provide adequate support for the conduit. For wiring the fence opener and coach lights, it is essential to follow all applicable electrical codes and safety guidelines. This includes properly grounding the equipment and using appropriate wiring methods. The GFCI receptacle must be installed in a location that is readily accessible and protected from the weather. The in-use cover plate will help to protect the receptacle from moisture and other environmental factors. The empty half-inch PVC conduit being installed for the control wiring of the fence is a good practice. This will allow for future control wiring to be installed without having to dig up the driveway. It is important to properly mark the location of the conduit to prevent it from being damaged during the driveway pouring process. When installing electrical wiring, it is crucial to follow all applicable codes and safety guidelines. This will help to ensure the safety of people and property. It is also important to use high-quality materials and to perform the work in a neat and workmanlike manner. In estimating the job costs, it's important to consider all the factors involved. Firstly, material costs, including wire, conduit, fittings, and other hardware. Secondly, labor costs, including time spent trenching, installing conduit, wiring the fence opener and coach lights, and installing the GFCI receptacle. Thirdly, permit fees, inspection fees, and other administrative costs. Fourthly, overhead costs such as insurance, vehicle expenses, and office supplies. Fifthly, a reasonable profit margin to ensure the business is sustainable. By carefully considering all these factors, an accurate and competitive bid can be prepared. Regarding the specific materials mentioned, the cost of 150 feet of THHN wire at $29, 100 feet of PVC conduit at $69, and 20 feet of half-inch PVC conduit at $335 seems inconsistent. The cost of the half-inch PVC conduit appears unusually high. It is important to verify these costs with local suppliers to ensure accuracy. Additionally, it's important to consider the type of THHN wire being used. The cost will vary depending on the gauge and the number of conductors. It's also important to factor in the cost of fittings such as connectors, couplings, and straps, which can add to the overall material cost. Regarding labor time, 2 to 3 hours for trenching, 1 to 2 hours to wire the fence, 1 to 2 hours to install the lights and receptacle, and 1 hour to install the control PVC seems like a reasonable estimate. However, the actual labor time will depend on the complexity of the job and the experience of the electrician. It is important to factor in potential delays such as unforeseen obstacles in the trench or difficulties in running the conduit. When bidding on electrical jobs, it's important to be competitive but also to ensure that the bid is profitable. It is important to know the market rate for electrical work in the area and to adjust the bid accordingly. It is also important to be able to justify the bid to the homeowner and to explain the value of the services being provided. If a homeowner chooses to go with a low bid, it's important to respect their decision and to move on to other opportunities. However, it's also important to learn from the experience and to identify any areas where the bid could have been improved. In some cases, it may be possible to negotiate with the homeowner to reach a mutually agreeable price. However, it's important to be firm on the minimum price that is acceptable and to avoid undervaluing services. When installing electrical wiring, it's important to follow all applicable codes and safety guidelines. This will help to ensure the safety of people and property. It's also important to use high-quality materials and to perform the work in a neat and workmanlike manner. By following these guidelines, one can provide a valuable service to the homeowner and build a successful electrical business. To elaborate further on the NEC requirements, consider Article 300.5, which covers underground installations. This article provides detailed information on the minimum burial depths for different types of wiring methods. As previously mentioned, the minimum burial depth for residential branch circuits depends on the wiring method used. For direct burial cables such as UF cable, the minimum burial depth is typically 12 inches. For PVC conduit, the minimum burial depth is typically 18 inches. However, it's important to consult the latest edition of the NEC and local codes to verify these requirements, as they may vary depending on the jurisdiction. In addition to burial depth, The NEC also addresses other aspects of underground installations, such as the type of backfill material that can be used, the spacing between conductors, and the protection of conductors from physical damage. It's important to carefully review these requirements to ensure that the installation is safe and code compliant. When running conduit under a sidewalk or driveway, it's important to take extra precautions to protect the conduit from damage. This may involve encasing the conduit in concrete or using a thicker walled conduit. It's also important to properly compact the soil around the conduit to provide adequate support. For wiring the fence opener and coach lights, it's important to use the correct size and type of wire. The NEC provides tables for determining the ampacity of conductors, such as those found in Table 310.15. These tables specify the maximum current that a conductor can carry safely based on its size, insulation type, and ambient temperature. It's important to select a conductor that is large enough to handle the load of the fence opener and coach light, with consideration for any potential future expansion. In addition to wire size, it's also important to use the correct type of wire connectors and splices. These connectors must be rated for the voltage and current of the circuit and must be properly installed to ensure a secure and reliable connection. When installing the GFCI receptacle, it's important to follow the manufacturer's instructions and to test the receptacle to ensure that it is working properly. GFCI receptacles are designed to protect people from electric shock and must be installed in locations where there is a potential for moisture, such as outdoors or in damp areas. The in-use cover plate will help to protect the receptacle from the weather and prevent moisture from entering the receptacle. For the empty half-inch PVC conduit being installed for the control wiring of the fence, it's important to cut the ends of the conduit to prevent debris from entering. It's also a good practice to label the conduit to indicate its purpose. This will help to prevent confusion in the future. When estimating the job cost, it's important to consider all the factors involved and to be as accurate as possible. This will help to ensure that the bid is competitive and profitable. It's also important to be transparent with the homeowner and to explain the basis for the bid. This will help to build trust and to increase the chances of getting the job. If the homeowner chooses to go with a lower bid, it's important to respect their decision and to move on to other opportunities. However, it's also important to learn from the experience and to identify any areas where the bid could have been improved. In some cases, it may be possible to negotiate with the homeowner to reach a mutually agreeable price. However, it's important to be firm on the minimum price that is acceptable and to avoid undervaluing services. To further illustrate the NEC requirements, let's consider Article 314, which covers outlet device, pole, and junction boxes, conduit bodies, fittings, and handhole enclosures. This article provides detailed information on the types of boxes and enclosures that can be used in electrical installations, as well as the requirements for their installation. For example, Article 314.16 specifies the volume requirements for boxes. This section provides formulas for calculating the minimum size of box required, based on the number and size of conductors entering the box. It's important to ensure that the boxes used in the installation are large enough to accommodate the conductors and devices being installed. In addition to box size, the NEC also addresses other aspects of box installation, such as the support of boxes, the protection of conductors from abrasion, and the grounding of boxes. It's important to carefully review these requirements to ensure that the installation is safe and code compliant. When running conduit, it's important to use the correct type of fittings and to properly support the conduit. The NEC provides guidelines for supporting conduit, such as those found in Article 344 for rigid metal conduit, Article 352 for rigid PVC conduit, and Article 358 for electrical metallic tubing. These guidelines specify the maximum spacing between supports, as well as the types of supports that can be used. It's important to follow these guidelines to ensure that the conduit is properly supported and protected from damage. When pulling conductors through conduit, it's important to use a lubricant to reduce friction and prevent damage to the conductors. The NEC recommends using a lubricant that is specifically designed for pulling electrical conductors. It's also important to avoid overfilling the conduit, as this can make it difficult to pull the conductors and can damage the conductors. For wiring the fence opener and coach lights, it's important to use devices that are rated for the environment in which they are being installed. For example, if the devices are being installed outdoors, they must be rated for wet locations. This means that they must be designed to withstand exposure to rain, snow, and other weather conditions. It's also important to use devices that are compatible with the wiring method being used. For example, if using non-metallic sheathed cable, the devices must be designed for use with non-metallic sheathed cable. When installing the GFCI receptacle, it's important to follow the manufacturer's instructions and to test the receptacle to ensure that it is working properly. GFCI receptacles are designed to protect people from electric shock and must be installed in locations where there is a potential for moisture, such as outdoors or in damp areas. The in-use cover plate will help to protect the receptacle from the weather and prevent moisture from entering the receptacle. For the empty half-inch PVC conduit being installed for the control wiring of the fence, it's important to cap the ends of the conduit to prevent debris from entering. It's also a good practice to label the conduit to indicate its purpose. This will help to prevent confusion in the future. When estimating the job cost, it's important to consider all the factors involved and to be as accurate as possible. This will help to ensure that the bid is competitive and profitable. It's also important to be transparent with the homeowner and to explain the basis for the bid. This will help to build trust and to increase the chances of getting the job. If the homeowner chooses to go with a lower bid, it's important to respect their decision and to move on to other opportunities. However, it's also important to learn from the experience and to identify any areas where the bid could have been improved. In some cases, it may be possible to negotiate with the homeowner to reach a mutually agreeable price. However, it's important to be firm on the minimum price that is acceptable and to avoid undervaluing services.